couple of out breaths just to let everything other than just this moment right now together, just letting everything else go. So we can just have this next hour and a half or so together without being pulled too much from what came earlier, whether it's earlier today or yesterday or a week ago or a year ago or 10 years ago or what might be tomorrow. But this is an opportunity for us just to come together in just a moment in time. Maybe by coming really deeply into just a moment in time, that moment can kind of help us sort of slip into the timeless perspective. But we can get to a little bit of that a little later. Again, because this is the Wednesday evening broadcast, this will be my last broadcast, Wednesday evening broadcast. I'll still do the next two Sunday morning broadcasts, the next two Sunday community practices that are on the calendar. I'll be doing those, so I'll have a couple left. But this evening, on this Wednesday evening, this is the last time I'm going to be on Wednesday evening. I know some of you won't be able to tune in on the next few Sundays, so I just wanted to respond to all of you. I just finished actually a few hours ago reading. I don't know how many hundreds of letters that people have been sending in since I announced that I was going to retire, and it's been really, really beautiful reading through those letters. And of course, they're lovely, and they have lots of well wishes and a lot of love and just a lot of warmth being expressed, which I really, really loved and enjoyed. But more than anything, the thing that I found so uplifting and inspiring, and it's taken me, 3 days to read through all these emails and some letters, was just people just sharing like the impact, right, of the teaching on them, which is really to say, that I took in the teaching and here's what I did with it, and here's what came from me out of utilizing it. And when I hear like what actually happens for people, right? Because that's the Dharma. That's spirituality. At the end of the day, when we cut through all the fancy concepts that we can get into and the belief systems and duality and non-duality, and it can just be sort of endless, and the sort of conceptual sort of circles we can get into with spirituality. But really, what it really comes down to is the immediacy, which is always the key, is the immediacy of our own nature. What do I mean by the immediacy? The key, really, it's not a secret, right? There's no the secret teaching is there really are no secret teachings anymore. But a real key is if we can get all of us, right? Our mind, our feeling, our perception, our sensation, our emotion. If we can kind of get all of us right into the present moment. Now, I know that nowadays things like saying the present moment has become like a spiritual cliche, right? It's used to market all sorts of things, spiritual and otherwise. But I'm not using it in a cliche way. I'm actually trying to use it in a profound way, the way that it was used by our ancestors, meaning whoever are the spiritual guides of our various communities and cultures were, Spirituality is about our own immediate experience of being. Immediate experience of being. And that immediate experience of being, this is kind of our commodity, right? This is what we all have. You have whatever your immediate experience of being is, right? Whatever it is. Don't worry, don't think about right and wrong. The right experience of being or the wrong experience of being, right? Those are sort of judgments that we drag into the moment with us. Rather just being. Just the moment. Just the instant. And if you feel into what I'm saying rather than kind of thinking about it too much, the feeling of it, just the moment. Like imagine, and I know this is imagination, but sometimes that can be useful. Imagine that just for a moment, like all sense of past was just gone, just for a moment, it'll come back, and all sense of future just disappeared. What would that be like? No past, no future. Of course, on a human level, we have a past, we have a future. I'm not denying any of that. That's part of our experience too. But just imagine to try to alter the perspective just a little bit, right? Just imagine no past. Imagine no future. And if you can feel into that a little bit, it's an incredibly unknown sort of landscape internally. Wide, open, unknown. That's an entry point. That's something to pay attention to. The unknown dimensions of our own experience, especially when we're looking into our own nature. If we bump into the known, we're just still caught in a bunch of concepts. They may be fancy and subtle and alluring, but it's conceptual nonetheless. When we get behind all that, of course, then we can bump into our sort of surface feeling, surface emotion. And by surface, I don't mean to discredit in any way. They're very real. But I mean, there's often something even deeper than what we sort of feel, even our emotions of the moment. Again, those are there. I'm not invalidating those, but those also are something like they're flickering. They come, they go. They're not actually you. Their experiences, their feelings, their thoughts. There's all these things that come and go through us, right? There's just the sense, almost intuitively, the sense of something always present. You know, think of how many thoughts have come through your mind today. How many feelings, imaginings. You've had to do all sorts of things, jobs, work, responsibility, all these things, right? If you just stop for a moment and kind of feel into, say, the last 24 hours. Everything's been changing, right? Inside you, all around you. And yet there's something that you can intuitively sense. Something is sort of there through the whole 24 hours or through the whole time that you can remember. But what's there through that whole time, it's not who we think we are. It's not who we imagine we are. It's not our judgments. It's not our shames. It's not how wonderful we might think we are, whatever. All this is conceptual. This comes and goes. We can get attached to it, and then it turns into feeling and emotion, of course. But in the end, right, if we just let it all kind of go, because these are all experiences that pass through us. And then there's that undefinable, really, unreducible element of being. And although we can give that lots of names, essentially, it has no name. As soon as we give it a name, we tend to go out to the name and away from what's immediately actually present. Right? Even if we give it a name like consciousness, we all have some idea of what we imagine consciousness to be, and that idea is already taking us a little way from the immediacy of our experience. And the immediacy of any experience is always bigger than what we may think or say about it. Whether it's the immediacy of some deep and profound spiritual experience or the immediacy of eating a banana. Either way, the direct experience of either one of those is going to break through the boundaries of definitions, right? You eating a banana is going to be totally different than the word banana. So all I'm trying to get here is kind of an orientation, right? An orientation to something that is quieter, that which is always awake, but often unrecognized. So I wanted to get to a few questions. Pardon me if I'm flitting around a little bit here, but that's just the way the evening's going so far. But like I said, I read so many hundreds and hundreds of emails, and it really has given me this wonderful view into all your experiences, right? The people who come to me and watch me and engage in these practices and take them to heart, and to have them sharing as part of their whatever they wanted to say to me. But I think what a lot of people wanted to do is not only share how the teaching touched them. That's of course really quite beautiful to hear. But what really lights me up is like how it touched somebody, right? How they lived with it. What's right? Because that's the thing that belongs to each person individually, right? That's not given to anybody. We may engage with a teaching, but teaching is meant to sort of elicit or evoke what's naturally what's present in us, right? What no one can give us and no one can take away from us, which is our own being, ourselves, as we actually are in truth and in reality. And that's a wonderful thing. And so I've just really enjoyed reading through a lot of these. I've always enjoyed reading through some of the emails and letters and stuff, because it gives me a view into what's actually happening for people, right? What they're doing, how they're interacting with the teaching. I learned a lot over the years from just listening to how people are utilizing different parts of the teachings and how they use it and how they make it into something that really works for them, which is all the kind of thing we should be doing with a teaching, right? We need to kind of stay true to it and remain some integrity with what the teaching's trying to orient us towards, but also we need to make it our own, right? We need to make it something that feels relevant, a way to approach it that feels relevant, because all these teachings are like I said, they're ways of evoking our true nature into current awareness. Right? And often it's just so much of this is just nobody talks to our true nature that much. We can talk about it, even that isn't done that much, but just talk right to your true nature. Like, you're here, and you as true nature, you're not the same as the sort of historical narrative context that we all have floating in our heads. Again, not that that's not relevant to our lives. We've all lived that. It's affected us. In that sense, it's important, but there is something also even more primary that's there. And a lot of what I try to do, and have tried to do in teaching, is like just evoke it. Because our little minds want to know, what do I do to get there? How do I get there? How do I achieve awakening? How do I do enlightenment? When really, kind of my side of the equation has always been, no, I know you're reaching out there. You're looking for this thing. You're grasping for this thing. You're searching for this thing called enlightenment, awakening, whatever it may be. I know that. I did that. I understand that. And I also know how much energy we put into that. And I also know when we're ready to hear a different sort of orientation, a different message, a different way of approaching it. When we're ready, we can just sort of turn around in a sense. And instead of I'm looking for enlightenment, we start to turn around and go, well, what is it in me that's looking for enlightenment? Who is it? And by the way, who is it that's sitting right here? Who is it that's having this conversation with myself? Right? Who is this that's longed after things I've longed for and avoided things I've tried to avoid? And who is that really at the center of my being? And I'm getting to something when I ask that question that predates even your language, before you even had language to develop an identity with, because it needs language to do that, and then memory and all the rest. But before we had the language and the self-consciousness to do that, say in the first year of our lives, not that we want to go back to a regressed state, but I'm just using this as sort of an example. Who we were then? Who were you? When you didn't even know your name, when you didn't have concepts, before you learned language, before somebody told you who you are, before somebody convinced you were good or bad or right or wrong or awakened or unawakened or whatever it might be. Who were you before anybody convinced you of anything? Because that being that you were is the being that you still are. Yes, we acquire a lot of stuff around it, a lot of ideas, a lot of identities. That's why it can be a little scary when we inquire into those things, but because we're inquiring into identities that at some level we really do feel like that's what I am. I am my judgments. I am my fears. I am my history. I am all that, right? That's what we think. That's what our little ego minds think. They imagine that. So it's a little scary. What would I be if actually I was wrong? If actually I wasn't all that? Maybe what if that little voice in my head that tells me about myself is just that? It's a little voice in your head telling you about yourself, but it's not really yourself. This is learned, this way we talk to ourselves, narrate our own narrative, comment on it. So life happens, doesn't it? If you're listening to this, you're not 1 year old anymore. You're not 6 months old anymore. More than likely, you're way, you got decades beyond that, more than likely, if you're listening to this. So we're not trying to go back to that infant state. We can't go back. We don't really even, that's not what spirituality is about. But there's sort of as an example, who we really are is who we've always been, which includes before we even had the language to bake up a fake identity. Even before that, we were. Every parent that's listening to me, you all know that you look at your child at 1 month old, 2 months old, 3 months old. They can't do much. they haven't unfolded a lot of their potential that they will, but no parent looks at their child and think, well, there's an incomplete child because they're an infant and they can't do much for themselves. No parent thinks that. They think that's like just the most beautiful, complete being they've ever experienced in their life. That's what parents think when they see their children. In that sense, they're seeing into something kind of transcendent in a way, actually. Let me get to a couple of questions that were asked. Well, before I do that, I just also, because we're here together on this Wednesday, um, and it's going to be my last one. When I say that, it feels incredibly final, and in one sense it is, but also in another sense, um, it doesn't feel final. Not going anywhere. I'm going to be here doing the Sunday community practices, even when I'm retired, but I'll be doing the meditations and on the Sunday mornings. So I will be here. I'm not going anywhere. But I do understand for a lot of you, this is an adjustment, a big adjustment. And with all the wonderful well wishes and just beautiful, heartfelt sentiments that so many of you have expressed to me, and it really, really has touched me. I really have appreciated this. I love to get inside and know what's happening, for people, because this is why I do it, right? To actually, to give some tools where people can actually transform their lives. And when they start to do that, it's a beautiful thing just to witness, to feel any part of. And so that's for me what's extraordinary. And I'm also sensitive to, with all the well wishes and the good, loving expressions. But there's also for plenty of people, there's some sadness about me stepping down from teaching, and I just wanted to acknowledge that, and I understand that. And as I said, watch out for your mind making it a bit more than it might be, because like I said, I'm not disappearing, not as far as I know. But even with that, I understand. It's especially for those who've been participating in this teaching and been with me for some time, or even if you're kind of new, but if you've really been captured by it, that can really, I know people have expressed their own sort of sadness and grief, but that's also an expression of love, which is sort of how I received that as an expression of love. And yet I also know for each person who wrote in and expressed themselves in that way, that for each of them that bitter sweetness, as my teacher used to say, all true love sheds a tear. It's like bittersweet chocolate. It kind of is like that, isn't it? The deepest experiences and expressions of love are almost, they have that, they are a little bittersweet. It's so beautiful or so intimate that there's just that, just like bittersweet chocolate, just needs a little bit of that. And that's the profoundness of love, right? Immature love is like cheap chocolate, overly sugary, quickly consumable and soon forgotten. But real love has that quality, right? Has that quality. If you've ever loved so much it's made you tear or weep just from the depth of the experience of love, you know what I mean? That's the bittersweet quality of it. And one of the things I tried to share in my writing, when I talked about my retirement from active teaching anyway, was my experience of my teacher. She's still alive. I think she's about somewhere between 100 and 102 now. I don't see her very often because we live apart from each other now. But once I started teaching, I didn't see her a lot. I was so busy, and yet what I realized was being away, not going every Sunday, and which I love to do. But she was with me. In other words, I had kind of internalized her presence, her being, her teaching. And I noticed it all lived in me, right? And I can, even to this day, even in this moment, I can feel the very particular place in my body where I feel like her presence is there anytime I want to check into it. And and the teaching from that continues to this day. 27 years since I began teaching. She asked me to teach probably 27 and a half years ago, something like that. And yeah. And to this day, like I said, she's still with me. And the interesting thing to me is a lot of the most potent teachings that I remember, because these memories are going back nearly 30 years or more, 30 to 45 years, some of them. Um, some of our greatest teachings were just like gestures. Weren't complicated dharma teachings. Those were interesting. They had impact, but it was something else. It was something underneath the words. It was just a way of being, the way she moved in the world. And that's all still with me. And maybe more than anything else, I feel like her integrity. There's a very specific kind of signature of I would call it the energy of a kind of integrity. And being with her for 14 years, I can feel how that energy lives in me too. That's kind of a transmission too, and now that energy lived in me, and that became at least as important for me as I was starting out teaching as it was for her. So this is all to say that, no teacher's around forever, in a form that we like this, bodily form. But the internal teacher, that which we've internalized, and that which can keep in its own creative way informing us, right? Where the presence of a teacher and our own creative intelligence are sort of mixing and informing us, right? Insights arrive, understandings arrive. All these things just can still keep going on unless our mind sort of forecloses on these deeper possibilities and goes, okay, well, the teacher's not teaching anymore. That's over. There's this very sort of linear, logical thing that will just cut us off from really what the teaching always was, always has been, and always will be. I've never wanted people to just, follow the teaching like in some rote, unreflective way, like they just do it because Adya says that's the best way to do it. I've never wanted somebody to do that. I wanted people to enter into their own spirituality, enter from the very beginning with their own intelligence, with their own discernment, with their own curiosity, with their own sense of wonder, right? We have to keep especially that curiosity and that wonder alive. We don't want spirituality to get so rote or so formulaic that we start to lose that vitality, that wonder. Do you know? That childlike curiosity, wonder. That's the seed of our spiritual instinct. That's what it is. And we have to be very careful not to let that just get trampled on. So the teachings and the teacher I've always meant just to support that process, as I tried to say in my writing, to kind of midwife people's true nature into conscious recognition. Um, and all that can happen, keep happening. Um, I think we each have to discover what it is for each of us. Again, if we have spent some real time and feel real deep connection with a teacher, um, that we are always oriented towards that helping us, as my teacher used to say, her wonderful definition of enlightenment was being able to stand on your own 2 feet. It's very Zen. It just so happens that being able to really stand on your own 2 feet, what is that? Really stand on your own 2 feet. It's no small thing. Because most of us are standing in a whole host of people's feet. A lot of nonsense we've inherited along the way, and beliefs that don't serve us, and judgments that aren't really life-giving, you know. And yet we really don't have to hold on to that. We really don't have to hold on to any of it. Can it be scary to let it all go? Sure, it can be scary to open your mind. It can be even scarier to open your heart. It can be scary to open your gut down here, where those deepest existential fears are. But encountering our fears is a profound part of this journey, because we often realize that some of our biggest fears are actually the doorways. You notice in almost all the spiritual myths, there's always guardians at the doorways to heaven or paradise or whatever. There's some sort of guardian, right? Now, this is metaphor for something that's quite internal within us, but nonetheless, it's very useful. And the guardians, whoever they may be, in all these different myths, they mean different things in different myths, but a sort of theme underlying them is 2 things, I think. Number one, we need to be empty, which means we can't walk into heaven dragging a whole bunch of ideas with us. We can't even drag a whole bunch of ideas about heaven with us into heaven, whatever we think heaven may be. So we have to, that's part of the letting go, right? We're letting go and we're letting go and we're letting go, so we can get down to what about us? What about you is not a belief. Is not a thought. What about you is not a judgment or the victim of your own judgment. See, so this awakening, so much of it is about getting honest and real and courageous. Because when we really look into ourselves, right? We really look, we're going to see those judgments. We're going to see those tapes in our heads from mom and dad and culture and society and brother and sister and who knows what else, friends and all sorts of things. And maybe, difficult things along the way as well. And we kind of get encultured, right, in a way to refer to ourselves. It would be one thing if it was healthy and made people happy, but just look around you. That's not the effect it seems to be having. Where there's something in each person that's innate, right? And by the way, I know you're not perfect. I'm not perfect either. I know you're a human being. I'm a human being too. We're all the same, right? But none of this discounts, none of this actually gets in the way of who and what we really are, unless we buy into all that. And strangely, it can be kind of disorienting, a little uncomfortable to stop buying into all the definitions we've bought in about ourselves, right? Because even when other people stop telling us who they think we are, then our own minds just continue it. Usually not particularly positive either. Okay. So that's the voice with a lot of people, most people that I've met. Okay, that's the voice. That's the judgment. That's not who you are. That's what we've learned. So in spirituality, it's actually a lot more about unlearning. Not so that you can be filled up with a bunch of spiritual mumbo jumbo and jargon and nonsense, right? Not so that you can be refilled with a bunch of new garbage, which happens a lot. Even my teaching, I don't want you to refill it with all this. We each discover our own divinity within ourselves. Utilize the teaching. Don't put it on an altar and worship it. Utilize it. You let it evoke what is ready to be evoked within you. And if it doesn't seem to help you, put it down. Go on your way. And don't feel bad about it. Go towards what serves you. What really serves you. Again, that's also a kind of internal intuition. What really serves me. What does it even mean for something to really authentically, deeply serve me? And what does that even mean, something to serve me? A teaching that serves me. Serves who? But still it's important, something that serves me, right? Something that helps evoke the best from you. Doesn't mean the path is always easy. It's not always easy. Doesn't mean there's not bumps along the road. Doesn't mean we all have to encounter whatever we have to encounter in our lives. You, me, all of us. But along through all of that, there is this light within us. It's not a light like you can see. It's not like lamplight. It's not sunlight. It's not moonlight. It's the light that's hearing these words. It's the light that feels what you feel. The light that is conscious that it is. Okay, I keep saying I'm going to get to a few of these questions. Oh. Here's one. I've noticed when Adya is asked a question that he often closes his eyes before he answers, and I've often wondered if it feels to him as if perhaps he's accessing a deeper place from which to answer the question. Yes, that's true, Rick. This is from Rick, by the way. Thank you for sending this, Rick. It reminds me of Nisargadatta's quote, "When I look out, I see everything, and that's love. When I look in, I see nothing, and that's wisdom. And between those two, my life turns." And my life moves between these two so that maybe the quote is not just a metaphor, but it can be a lived experience, maybe for all of us. You better believe it, Rick. It can be a lived experience. It's not a metaphor. He meant that concretely, and I think he was talking from his immediate experience of truth. And yes, it's there for all of us. It's not just for special people, special beings, you know? It's there for all of us. Let's see. So yeah, really it's about closing the eyes and accessing. And I just wanted to touch upon this because this is for anybody, right? We can be in a conversation, but especially when it's important. When somebody's asking me a teaching or a question when I'm teaching, I take that question as important as could possibly be taken. And when someone asks a question, sometimes it's just whatever comes out just comes out, spills right out. And often someone asks a question and I will just close the eyes. And I'm not doing anything fancy or special. I'm waiting. just waiting. And I don't care how long it takes. Waiting for that impetus that comes right out of quietness. Now, quietness also, when I'm using the term in this context, quietness is also kind of the reason that so much wisdom comes out of quietness, because in that real deep ground, right, of our being, ground of the mind, ground of the psyche, right, there's this profound connection with everything. Everything is affecting everything else, all at the same time. And this is all happening in total silence. You look out the window in nature, let's say, totally quiet, and yet it's also completely a unified field. So when I say quietness, I'm really, when I'm closing my eyes and being quiet, the quietness is an entry point into what I'll call a unified field. That field of being where everything is connected with everything else and affecting everything else. And from that, then the response comes, right? Not from little old me, but it comes from the field. And so when I do close my eyes, it's kind of a deeper just connecting with that field. It's at this point, someone might say, well, what are you doing? How are you doing that? There isn't a technique for me. Because that field, I'm already in that field. Say I'm teaching now, it's already in that field, but I close the eyes and the mouth. Just for a moment. Feel that connection in the quiet with things, even with yourself. This is the territory of, in Zen, what we would call prajna, that spontaneous arising of heart wisdom, the wisdom that comes from a place that's totally connected. And then it just arises up. So that's often what I'm doing when the eyes close. But it's really a spontaneous thing. There's no real intention or purpose or technique on my part, except that I'm doing what I teach. That's what I'm actually doing. When the eyes close, right? I just close the eyes and I'm letting something guide, right? I'm not doing anything. I'm just surrendered to sensing the whole field, or what the moment wants me to speak. And that's it. And you can do that too. And the more you practice, the better you get. And you can practice on the small stuff. Practice on the decisions that don't seem to be that important, or the encounters that don't seem to be real weighty. Practice like that, at getting a sense how to touch into that field in some way, right? And or just, even if you sorry, Adya, I don't know what the unified field is. I'm not quite there yet, but it's fine. But you can touch into the most unified place in your being just by being quiet for a moment. Just close those eyes just for a moment. Exhale. Let yourself drop. Into that place inside that's strangely nowhere, but also feels like home. And you might notice you just feel a little more connected. You can open your eyes, just feel a little more connected. It may be very subtle for some of you. That's fine. Let it be subtle. Right? Be devoted to that, to however that our deeper being is expressing itself. That's the object of our devotion, our humility. Something in us that we are is also simultaneously something that's bigger than us as a human aspect and is informing us as our human aspect. And what's informing us? Our true nature. Let's see. This one I'm going to kind of go to just to the point. This is sent in by M. It said, "Thank you, M." I'm just going to go kind of to the point. During extended retreat or meditation, this deep fear pulls me. It's unconscious, but seems to say, if I hang on to a self, then I won't be alone. How can I be with unbearable aloneness? Especially when the narrative is there must be something wrong with me if I am alone. Does that sound familiar to anybody out there? More than M, I imagine it might. Let me just read that little paragraph. During extended retreat or meditation, this deep fear pulls me. It's unconscious but seems to say, if I hang on to a self, then I won't be alone. How can I be with unbearable aloneness? Especially when the narrative is there must be something wrong with me if I am alone. First of all, that narrative, there must be something wrong with me if I'm alone. Who would you be without that? Can you feel that? There must be something wrong with me if I'm alone. When you hear those words, let's imagine we take them as real. You feel how that kind of creates a kind of discord in the body, even in the body, in the mind, in the emotion, right? When we start to believe the narrative. There must be something wrong with me if I'm alone. There's the narrative. I don't know how that got going, but a lot of people have that, right? So we're never making the narrative like right or wrong. We're not judging the narrative in some moralistic way. We're just saying, hey, that's the tape that's playing in your mind. That's the tape that's pretending to be who you are. It's a little scary to look beyond that because as uncomfortable as that little tape may be in your mind, without that, well, who would you be then? And that's when our minds tend to go, I don't know. That's the entrance point, my friends. I don't know. I don't know who I would be if there wasn't something wrong with me, if I didn't feel like that, if I didn't keep telling myself that. I wouldn't even know who I am. Okay, try it on. What's it like not to know? Is it really as bad as we think? I don't really know, but we can think that, or we can feel into that. I don't really know. And I don't know who I am when we do this in this deeper way. It's open and it's expansive and it's mysterious. When we buy into the narrative too much, then it all does the opposite. It shrinks up, right? So I don't know. That's the way. That is the way. So I don't know how it got in place, if there's something wrong with me if I am alone. But a lot of spirituality, at a certain point, it is really diving into your aloneness, not your loneliness. People mistake aloneness for loneliness. We all know what it's like to be lonely, right? To be on our own, not have friends there when we want them or companionship, or we know what loneliness feels like, no doubt. I'm not so sure that many people know what aloneness really feels like. Because aloneness isn't the same as loneliness. So sometimes we take the narrative, if I hang on to a self, then I won't be alone. If I hang on to a self, then I won't be alone. Is that really true? Does hanging on to that self, that idea of ourselves, that image and all the feelings that go along with it, does that actually make us feel not alone? Do we feel embraced by that and held in warmth and love and compassion and support? I don't think we do. I think actually our narratives often make us feel very alone. So we're often afraid of the thing that's already happening. I'll be alone when or if. Well, wait a minute, I kind of feel alone right now. So entering our aloneness, yes, it can be frightening sometimes. Who am I will put you in your aloneness. And if we just stay on the periphery, kind of, then that aloneness will be mixed with loneliness and all of our experiences of loneliness, as painful as those can be. But if we just sit in our aloneness, in that part of ourselves, that unconditioned consciousness. The mind is conditioned, the body is conditioned, everything in us all around us is conditioned, but there is that unconditioned being, consciousness, spirit, call it what you will. There is that within you, within everybody, that is unconditioned right now. Your mind may be conditioned to the hilt, but there's also simultaneously something unconditioned, namely that consciousness that is noticing the conditioning. That consciousness that notices the conditioning is itself unconditioned, or has an aspect of itself that's unconditioned. And sometimes by going through our aloneness, it can often cure a kind of existential loneliness, because there's often a kind of alienation in our ego minds to varying degrees, right? A sense of apartness, whether it's from people, the world around us, the things around us. We often don't have that intimate experience of being, so we don't have that intimate experience of connecting with life, with people, with events. We're kind of going through the motions, but not feeling intimately connected with things, you see. So the aloneness, going through it, again, not stopping in the middle and feeling really lonely, but by going through your aloneness, by meeting that experience head on, open to it, it can deliver you to really that unified ground of being. And it's often through the aloneness that we arrive at that unified ground, and that unified ground makes us feel like we're in great company. Yeah. So question that conclusion. I'll be alone. You know, if I hang on to a self, then I won't be alone. Like I said, I think a lot of people feel alone already, even when they're hanging on to the ego. And a lot of times hanging on actually makes us feel alone, because it kind of estranges us from our own deeper nature, where we're all one more than we're alone. Okay. Well, those are some of the questions. for the evening. There were many more. Of course, there's always far more questions than I can get to. And yet, really, what I do when I respond to any of these inquiries, even though at times I may give what appears or sounds like an answer, my intention is actually to invite you into a kind of discovery of finding your answers, finding your own resolutions, that dive into yourself, that encountering that quiet mystery of being. And at the level of being, there's always meeting. I'll try to explain this one last time. So I'm married to Mukti. We've been married 28 years in January, I believe. Yeah, 28 years. We've been together for like 30 or a little more. And although, like any couples, Mukti or I, we come and go, we go do an errand, we do something where, there's a lot of coming and going, but there's also, I'm never away, never apart from Mukti. She's always with me, even when I am apart. It's just like her presence is just right there, always. And that's what I'm saying, when we've sort of internalized someone, their presence of being, whatever it may be, then if we really want them to, if we really listen for it, if we are attuned for it, they're there. There's a presence within us, right? So I hope that will be of some support to all of you. And also the capacity that each person has, each of you, is far beyond what you imagine. So really, my friends, there's only eternal meeting on the deepest place inside. And that deep core will just keep informing you. It's about our intention. If our intention is aligned, if we have that love of truth and that love of love and compassion, intention is extremely important and profound, and aligns forces within us. Not to chase something, not aligning for the big chase, but aligning the forces within us so we can actually be totally here, completely. And recognizing that place in our own consciousness that is prior to even our own conditioning. And one of the fastest ways to kind of access that is just all at once, just accept all of your conditioning all at once. Try it for a moment. Just all at once. The good, the bad, the indifferent, everything all at once. Just yes. Okay. Right? And if you can do that in a deep way, just a profound yes, then your conditioning isn't hooking you as much. Then you can go, hey, there's more to me than just all those conditioning. There's something else. There's this quieter, shining presence of being in there. Right? But it's hard to get there when we're in this whole self-judgment program in our minds. And I know a lot of people have been taught that. Right? But okay, so you've been taught that. You've learned that. You can also unlearn it. We can unlearn things we've learned, not just in our heads, but in our feelings, our being, all of it. Okay, my friends, so let's see till we go. Oh, I just told I have a half hour to go more. That's fun. Let me take another drink of water and we will continue. That's delightful. Mukti just told me. You'd think after 27 years, I might remember when this thing is over. But it takes a whole village to keep me on time. So I'm glad to have it when it comes, and I'm actually also glad to have a little bit more time together with you too. And I think we need to support one another. Uh, with a rapid breakdown of our spiritual communities. And some of that's understandable because some of those communities haven't served us particularly well or needed to be reformed or exposed or whatever it may be. And yet, there's a function that some of those communities provided, namely bringing people together. Right? Just togetherness of support, as we say, sangha, which is a supportive spiritual community. Not hopefully an enclosed, isolated, ideological spiritual community, right? That's, I don't even know, that's nonsense. that's the most charitable I can say, but a real spiritual community. And in the modern day, and I've thought about this ever since I began teaching 27 years ago, I've noticed this, that as some of these sort of more traditional, historical, religious structures sort of are crumbling around us, some of which is quite well deserved. And yet we should also recognize that in that crumbling, what's in it of value that we want to make sure we don't lose too much, because we're in the process of losing it very quickly right now. And that's just our togetherness. I love the way that I have been able to reach out and use this medium to literally talk to anybody around the world. That's just amazing and beautiful. And my hope has always been that people would come together in these little groups, kind of like I was with my teacher. But that's kind of where the idea for like the Adyashanti groups to come together to watch videos and stuff like that. And yes, it's about the teaching and having a place to come to engage with that. But it's also, I see it as important, just these little groups of people coming together to support one another. Right? Life's a bouncy ride, even at good times. And spirituality is kind of it's kind of an unusual thing to do. And we encounter sort of unusual dimensions of our own being. And to have some support is really helpful. Even if it's just a spiritual friend, or you put a little group of people that meet each week together, or these ways of where we really do need to start creating our own little communities, right? Whether they're little groups or more official communities. Just given my makeup, probably from birth, I was never going to be someone who started a spiritual community. I'm too much of a sort of a hermit to do that. And yet, even as the way I'm hooked up, I can see the great need for connection and to reach out and even to form connections, right? We're not necessarily powerless. We can make little groups where we come together to meditate together or to listen to a teaching, but that power of when people aren't supporting one another, right? Again, the danger is that it becomes too ideological, too insular. But at its heart, if we always remember that Sangha is about a sort of a loving support of each other and an understanding support. If you've done this for a while, you know the great beauty and and grace of it, and you know the challenges of it, and just that that knowledge can help with just a kind of, again, a kind of loving support, and coming together in a world that's fracturing so much. Even with all this technology, let's not forget that to actually meet each other, hug each other, um, to really connect in that way is so important for our humanness. And to me, that's true spiritual community. Something's focused on truthfulness, honesty, and integrity, and mutual support. So I just say that because I do think it's an important thing. I think it's kind of a missing dimension in the kind of modern spiritual world, that so many of the old structures are collapsing, and a lot of that is really good because it's kind of allowed spirituality to be free from some of these structures that attempted to contain it. Never really could, but they tried hard. And also, these old structures had really important functions at different times. I came from the Zen tradition, and when I first got into it, you read all these stories of these like swashbuckling, eccentric Zen masters of times past. And then when I went into Zen and started training in the sort of traditional Zen environment, it's anything but swashbuckling, and it's very regimented and very, very regimented. And it was like, what in the hell's going on here? How does something so regimented sometimes produce these dynamic, unique spiritual geniuses? I found out something that they had learned in that tradition, I think, a long time ago, is that freedom, real freedom, is a bit like, it's not the same as, but a bit like, say, learning to play an instrument, right? In the sense of, in order to really play well, or if you want to improvise, you or I could just pick up an instrument and start blowing on it or plucking on strings and improvising, but it's going to sound like a chaotic mess unless we know what we're doing. So I realized through all that discipline practice, but the discipline was almost like a musician putting in their hours of practice, and then all that leads up to a moment or times when they can finally start to let go, and they can improvise, and this beautiful creative music comes out of them, right? But they couldn't do that if they'd never learned, if they never had the discipline, if they never had any foundation. They just can't just pick up something and blow on it and think you're going to make great music. There's a breakdown in that metaphor. There's several of them, but nonetheless, if we push it too far. But there is something important to understand about freedom, and where real freedom often springs from. And real freedom does come from it's not a chaotic place. It's not a self-indulgent place. It's a very sort of grounded place inside. And freedom with no discipline isn't really freedom at all. It tends to be too indulgent. So we have to find that sort of mix inside towards enough discipline, right? So it's not just all about self-indulgent. I'll meditate whenever I want, and it can be quite self-indulgent, but also imposing a little bit of discipline on ourselves, but also not letting it become overly tight, overly constrained, overly, this is the way it has to be done, all of that. So this is like a balancing act. A sort of disciplined freedom, a sort of that eventually leads to spontaneity, like an amazing jazz artist who can just play the most amazing, spontaneous solos. And we hear that and you think, wow, I'd love to do that. That would be just amazing. Yeah, and they also practiced and played for 40 years to be able to do that. They just didn't sit down, pick it up, and do it. Now, our true nature is different because we don't necessarily have to practice our true nature and develop it, and although it can be developed in a way, especially after some awakening. So, like I said, there's places where the metaphor kind of breaks down, but in general, I think it's really important to understand this kind of combination, which I've always tried to find a way to embody, not in the teachings, but even in the structure of the teachings, structure of retreats and events I did were actually, as I often said, very, very, every minute literally was kind of planned out to kind of be even schedules at retreat were meant to kind of be an embodied expression of this combination between sincere, uh, ego diminishing discipline and connecting, spontaneous, heartfelt connection. There's a kind of balance between those two. So Zen kind of cooled a little bit my sort of maverick independence that I came into Zen with. Just the kind of way I was hooked up. But it didn't squash it, obviously. But it also kind of cooled it in the sense that it started to take the egoic elements out of it, or I could see the egoic elements out of it and start to let go of those and keep the authentic, the real authenticity inside. And so in all this teaching, in all the teachings, I have attempted to convey that sense of discipline and spontaneity, innocent spontaneity. One without the other gets a little too much discipline, and it's just too hard and rigid, and you can just tell when someone's too wound up in their little whole spiritual box they have in their mind, right? And they're tight, and that's not really serving. We could also go the opposite and just have no discipline, and it happens when it happens, and it's all the will of God, and there's nothing I can do anyway. And we kind of use the teachings of non-duality to shirk responsibility for our own spiritual development. We can do that, and that's pretty popular in non-dual circles. Or we can just come back to something more integral, something that feels more balanced. If you want to get good at anything, you got to put yourself behind it, right? There's a practice element to almost anything you've ever gotten good at. Have you noticed? Now again, our true nature is not something that is manufactured because we practice. It's there from the very beginning. The practice helps reveal it to us, right? So I hope you can continue to find that balance point. The discipline point keeps you honest and real. Honest with yourself and real with yourself. And the more spontaneous part, where I encourage people not to struggle, to just let every part of their experience be. In other words, let it all settle. Can you let all of your experience be without judging it? No matter how light or dark some of it might be, can you just let it be as it is? If we can really let things be, then they don't hold us much. As soon as we begin to struggle with them or use use them for excuses or whatever, all of a sudden we tend to be tied to our conditioning much more. It grabs us. It's like a hook. We have become Velcro. In a certain sense, spirituality is about removing all the Velcro, the things that which attaches so much to us. So whatever the deepest thing you know and experience is, whatever that is, what's the deepest thing you know and experience? Don't even be quick to answer. What's the deepest thing you know and experience? The deepest thing you know and experience. Whatever that is, what might that be if you endeavored to live that, in a sense that you embody that in your next conversation, in the way you walk down the street, in the way you get into your car, in the way you drive your car, in the way you have the next conversation, in the way you're at work? Are we connected to the most important thing we know? Someone might be saying, yes, Adya, but I'm not enlightened, I'm not awakened, I don't know that. Okay, fine, but you do know things of incredible value. You don't have to be awakened for that. You know what's valuable to you, what's the most important thing. This is kind of what connects us to our spirit. When we can start to notice that, and then start just live in the wondering. What would it be like to live from that place that I myself have decided I value so deeply? What might it be like to relate from that space? Even if I never talk about that space, but I'm talking from it, or relating from it, or perceiving from it. Right? What might that be like? So we all have the deepest thing in us, the deepest thing we know. We do not need to devalue it just because we do not think we're awakened or enlightened. That's where we're embodying our own depth begins. It begins right where we are, wherever that is. Right where you are, right here, right now. Not who you'll be tomorrow when you get your act together and when you're a better person and all of that, but right here, right now. As I said at the beginning, that's always the key, right? Right here, right now. The deepest thing that you know and value. And what would that be like if you move from that place? If you try to do this, if you even consider doing this, are you going to screw it up 100 times in a single day? Sure you will, probably. But that's fine. That's how you get better at it. If you just think, oh, I'm not good at this, where do I start? I won't do anything. We never get better. We start exactly where we are, because that's the perfect place to start. What do I know? What's the most valuable thing right here, right now? Someone might say love or connection or truth or who knows what it is. Okay, what would it be like to function from that place? Start easy. Brush your teeth from that place. Wash the dishes from that place. Walk down the hallway from that place. Then later, you can do discussions. And then maybe later, you can get into even more challenging things. But getting used to functioning from your depth, again, whatever the depth is, don't discount your depth because you just say, oh, I haven't achieved such and such spiritual state yet. That may or may not be true, but don't use that to devalue what's true and important at the deepest level that you have access to right now. That's your way in. That's the portal. That's the opening. Just giving attention to it. Okay. We're getting near that time, my friends. Like I said, I am going to be doing a couple more live broadcasts. Will be, let me look on my little notes here, October 8th, this Sunday, and October 22nd, which will also be another Sunday community practice. That's from 9 to 11. There's also a pre-program meditation that starts at 8 a.m. before that. Mukti and I just do a silent meditation before the official community practice starts. So I hope you will feel free to join me then. Also, Mukti is our next free live broadcast these Wednesday evenings. October 18th at 6 p.m. will be Mukti. So Mukti will be doing the next free live broadcast Wednesday, October 18th, which is 6 o'clock p.m. Last note, my friends. The October 22nd program will be the final broadcast that I will lead, given my retirement at the end of the month. Mukti will lead the programs thereafter as head teacher of Open Gate Sangha. And I feel like I'm going to be leaving you all in very, very good hands. I couldn't know Mukti better. And I'm so grateful that she willing and wanting to carry this beautiful teaching of truth forward in her own beautiful and unique way. So the final broadcast I'll have will be October 22nd, but I'll be here this weekend on October 8th and then the 22nd, and Mukti will be teaching on Wednesday, October 18th. You can find all of that on the website, of course, and the calendar, and see what I'm up to and what Mukti's up to. So, my friends, I want to say for this evening, it's been wonderful to be with you, as always. And something in my mind just thought about a goodbye, but my deeper sense is that's not necessary. We'll meet in the quiet spaces in between, where we're all share that beautiful light of being, and where none of us is higher or lower than another. That core of being. That's what we're here to not only recognize, but celebrate. And in whatever way we can, great or small, seek to embody our depth, whatever your depth is. Again, don't wait to have some really deep spiritual experience to begin embodying your depth. Do it right now. Man, you'll feel so much better. It will feel so much better when we just start embodying our depth and wondering, what is that and how do I do that? And coming from that place. Again, we're not proselytizing about our depth. It's just coming from that place of love, that connected place of love and understanding and also wisdom, right? So I'm emphasizing this because there's so much in spirituality of, oh, I can't do until I have such and such experience. Nonsense. You have depth in you. You have the deepest thing, whatever that is. If we start even attempting to live from that, then the next deeper thing shows up. And the next deeper thing open. And then we fall right into our true nature, which was always here from the very beginning. But we have such an instinct to recognize that which has been here from the very beginning. Or as we say in Zen, who you were before your parents were born. So, in that place where we always meet, that's a good time to bring this program to a close and let it just rest in that place where we always meet. And until we meet again, my friends, wonderful to spend the time with you all. Love you all. Namaste. Until we meet next time.